Chandra Brown, thanks for being here.
Hi, Brendan. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yes, my name's Chandra. I'm originally from Alaska. I live in western Montana, just upstream from you.
Hmm.
And I'm an educator, first and foremost, and a writer and an entrepreneur, and also a kind of a am trapped in this career as a river guide. Can't quite escape it.
Because of the money? Like it's so much money all the time.
It's like
Yeah.
a lot of money. Yeah, it's a it's, it's a lot of money and a lot of prestige, and I just can't shake it.
I understand you own your own business, educational business. Is that true?
It's true. Yeah, I don't know who told you. But yeah, I run an organization here in Missoula called Free Flow Institute, and we, including you, as one of our our instructors. We build creative outdoor education opportunities for people, kind of wilderness based outdoor learning, and the creative arts communications at the center of it.
Yeah, and we know each other because you've graciously allowed me to learn to teach through doing free flow workshops starting in 2019. And nobody noticed the entire time. They weren't like, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's doing. But I feel like we're pulling it off. And we have a workshop this June on Homestake Pass in Montana, trail running and writing. We have a few spots still open.
Yeah,
Correct?
yeah, yeah. Super exciting. And Brendan, it's been absolutely delightful to watch you teach and watch your teaching sort of evolve and change. And I think that you have taught more consistently with free flow than any of our other instructors. And so you're basically a you're basically like co-operator of the organization.
I don't know if I go that far. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, and this idea, the idea for your workshop, which is this hybrid of, creative writing and like low key, well supported trail running, is one of the most wonderful things that anyone who likes to be on their feet and likes to write and read could hope to do. And so, thanks for opening that space to the free flow community year after year.
I agree. But I think that was just like a co-developed thing. We were just like, what the hell? What should we try? Because we did river trips, then we did sea kayaking, and then we settled on trail running, and that's been pretty great. So
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, should we get to your list?
Yeah. Let's
Okay. Your favorite things. Number one, Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell. Where where are you in life, and how old are you when you first encounter this book?
I am probably in third or fourth grade, which would be um, Mrs. Carter's class, probably Mrs. Carter's class at Snowshoe Elementary School outside of Wasilla, Alaska. And it was required reading, maybe I was in fourth grade, maybe I was in fifth grade. I can't quite recall, but it was compulsory to read this book, as it is in or was in so many classrooms for folks of our generation.
And can you describe? There's a lot of people. I actually still have never read it. Hillary's read it, but can you describe what happens in the book a little bit for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, and I will preface this by saying that the book now in the modern era encounters a significant amount of challenge and controversy.
Hmm.
It's problematic. But given the context of like, late 80s, early 90s, public education I think that we have to be a little bit, we have to extend it some grace. But what happens is, and it's loosely based on a true story, and it's been modified significant. Scott Odell, the author, was like a Hollywood, I think he was a maybe a screenwriter or a filmmaker
Hmm.
before he wrote this book, and so his like cinematic liberties are significant. But basically, he's taken the story of an indigenous woman from the California coast, from the Channel Islands, who lived alone on this island after a conflict that ended poorly, where she was sort of lost from her community, and so it features a young indigenous protagonist, which is also problematic because it's told from this her perspective as conveyed by Scott Odell, who's like a 50 or 60 something year old white guy with little to no understanding of this actual community, this actual culture. But she basically survives on this island by herself for a number of years. I can't recall. Um, and it's, this book is sort of in this triad. I tend to group them all together of like, it was My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craighead George, and then also Julie of the Wolves by Jean Craighead George. All three of these are like Newbery Medal winners, like highly acclaimed young adult fiction novels. All very problematic and challenged, if not banned at this point, from reading lists in the school libraries. But all of these books dealt so beautifully with these themes, like relationships between humans and animals was a big one, and self-sufficiency and survival, and like creative tactics for survival as a young person, like out in the world, away from the built environment. So, and I think importantly too, they deal with these themes of autonomy and independence from adults, which was obviously really appealing, you know, still,
Yeah.
like,
You're like 8 or 9. Are you adventurous? Are you like doing stuff in the outdoors at this point? Or is this like kind of a revelation to you and like, oh my gosh, I want to do these adventures, or I want to be like, this self-sufficient, person who can survive on their own in the wilderness.
yeah, yeah, these books felt like instruction manuals, you know? And I think that where I grew up, I grew up in Alaska, but I did not grow up in a family that was like, get out there and have adventures. I mean, we were like a hunting and fishing family, and we had snow machines, otherwise known here as snowmobiles, and
The disdain.
but I mean, yeah, these felt like here's what's possible, right? Like here's what you could do. Um, and maybe you don't need to endure some massive trauma, to catalyze your participation in these adventures, or in this sort of this self-sufficiency. And maybe, as all those characters in those books did, they dealt with like really hard things, and they dealt with big, human challenges like death and suffering and violence. But ultimately, they got away from clocks and schools and the impositions of adult culture.
And we have like a pretty big jump in between your first and second item on this list. So how how do you see Island of the Blue Dolphins affecting you as you get older and go to junior high and high school, and then make decisions about, well, up until 2001?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Island of the Blue Dolphins. yeah, somehow that character affected me in such a profound way. Um, I think that as I continued going through school, I lived in Alaska in the same house my whole childhood. I just had these dreams of creating things, and creating um, with an with the things of the earth, right? Like I was very drawn to being outside and like seeing what can happen, if we spend more time outside. um, and I think I was a junior in high school when I decided I would somehow form these relationships with rivers. I was really drawn to rivers. And I wanted to know rivers beyond just standing on the bank and fishing. And so that's sort of when I started daydreaming about becoming a river guide and learning more about what it is to work outside, and in a different context. So yeah, I don't know how much I can say that that particular narrative carried me through. Like, I don't know if it was actually a through line, but it definitely provided some early inspiration for
And
what was to come.
what's your first? What was your first river guide job? And what year was that?
I got my first river guide job, um, working in the office of Denali Raft Adventures, on the Nenana River up in Denali National Park, on the periphery of Denali National Park, the summer after my freshman year of college. And then
Okay.
I went there with the express intention of basically coercing these established river guides into teaching me how to row boats as a super annoying like 18-year-old. So and then I had this mission of like I wanted to go back and guide in Alaska, but in order to work on those rivers up there, you had to have a certain amount of experience on warmer rivers. So I was going to school in college in Bozeman, and so I ended up working on the Yellowstone, and then moving to the desert to try to down to like the Colorado and Green Rivers to try to accumulate this very minimal experience that Alaska was asking me to have as my qualifications.
Were there a lot of women river guides in those companies where you were working or trying to work at that time?
No.
So you were in this whole male dominated space and trying to forge that ahead at that point, huh?
Yeah. And I think back to the women that were working in the industry then. I remember them all so clearly. I mean, they stand out as like, these, they're not caricatures, but they're definitely characters that I can picture them all. And now it's the world of river guiding has come so far, and there are often, it seems like, as many females guiding as males, but when I started it wasn't like that. And
Hmm.
so it definitely brought me up in a different sort of, it was influential,
Hmm.
that culture.
So, number two, My Morning Jackets album, At Dawn, 2001. I like pulled this up on Apple Music, and it's not even one of their quote unquote essential albums. And I was like, come on, Apple Music. Like, this is
Do
a.
you like that album?
Yeah, I was listening to it in like 2002, 2003, I think, a bunch. And I think the previous album too, maybe. Or maybe the one right after that. Um, but yeah, what is it? Where are you in life when you encounter My Morning Jacket for the first time? Or just this album for the first time, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So I think this is kind of this is a huge leap from third grade, like you were saying. This is like 26-year-old me. I just finished undergrad and had worked a season on the Gauley River over in West Virginia, and then had decided to take a year um, to think about what my next move would be. And so I took that year to work in West Virginia, and then I moved to Alta, Utah, to work as a lifty, which is another job is really hard to leave because of the money and the prestige, you know. But
The lore, I know. Everyone knows that.
everyone knows that.
And if they don't, they assume.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, so I don't have to explain to you why I was there. It was for the money. And and it was, 26. I've actually was talking with Nate, my husband, about this yesterday. And he had a comparable sort of set of memories around music that he was listening to when he was 26, because that's a hard, depending on what you have chosen to do with your life up to that point, like 26 can be kind of gnarly. And for me, it was definitely a really ugly, like, transitional period, where the structure of undergraduate school with college has suddenly dissolved, and I'm out there in the world, like, making some pretty messy mistakes. And so I was bartending down in Midvale, which is kind of where Little Cottonwood, if like Little Cottonwood Canyon, which is where Alta is, if it had like a delta, like a delta, like Midvale would be like where it dumps out, right? And like, and I could ride the bus from, that's where I was living with a bunch of river guides from West Virginia, and then I'd ride the public bus up to Alta. So I'd like bartend at night and then go do my lifty job in the daytime. I was sober. I had made some big mistakes, and so this year I was totally sober for the first time in my adult life, and and the ski industry, like the river industry, is kind of a hard place to be sober, and was back then anyway, especially. I was Yeah, I was just kind of like, I was trying to learn to ski and powder on these old skinny telemark skis.
Oh.
And I was just trying to establish myself, like, out of college and out of the context of river work. And I had my little iPod. I remember it was in some sort of white protective case. And I would sit there on that bus listening to this My Morning Jacket album, which was this was the second studio album from My Morning Jacket. It was the first exposure I'd had to the band. I was madly in love with Widespread Panic at the time, and still am. And My Morning Jacket was sort of affiliated loosely with like the Widespread Panic touring circuit, and they played some of the same festivals, and so I knew of them, and um, I feel like those bus rides is where I really got to know My Morning Jacket. And it was a really moody soundtrack to um, the stormy weather inside my 26-year-old head.
Yeah, I follow this YouTuber who, it doesn't, specifics don't matter, but he like said something like, he says that I would argue that music is only as good as the memory that's associated with it, and
Mm-hmm.
like how much nostalgia plays into how much we, you know, listen, how much things stick in our brains. And I think like you're not on your phone then, you're like
Right.
listening to this album. You're, I don't know, are you lonely, feeling a little bit isolated, and like doing these long bus rides? Like, is that your memory of it, and like why this is such a good soundtrack for it?
Yeah, I think lonely, despite the fact I lived in a crowded house with like five or six other humans, lonely despite the fact I was on this bus with so many, it's always so crowded, lonely, despite the fact I spent all day like shoveling snow and like shoving people's butts into chairlift seats. And I think that is a special brand of loneliness, right? And it comes in my memory, it comes from or came from just a lack of familiarity with my own like evolving self. And so there is like a special there's an interesting valence to that type of loneliness that I think is reserved for youth, or like that transition away from being sort of you're starting to realize the gravity and of your actions and the impact that your mistakes can have in the world.
Yeah, trying to find your people or thinking you might be finding your people, but why am I so alone amongst these people
Yeah,
and all that maybe.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's something about that album. He did you know? You probably already know this, but they're from Kentucky, and they recorded that At Dawn album in an abandoned grain silo on
Oh
a
wow, I didn't know that. Yeah.
for like the reverb, for like the natural reverb. And there is that like strange ethereal like echoey sound throughout the whole album that feels really like spacious and airy, but also like kind of spooky.
Yeah, I was gonna say haunted or
Yes,
haunting. Yeah.
yes.
Um, yeah, that's fantastic. What's your if somebody's never listened to this album, what's your track you would tell them to start it on?
Man. So there's one track on there so this was when like I feel like in their second studio album, My Morning Jacket like started to get kind of weird, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I'll say that the first time I saw them play live, Jim James, the front man, was wearing like moon boots and maybe a cape and like maybe had a sidearm in a holster, right? Like so like weird and kind of over the top and wonderful. And there's one song on there called Phone Went West. It's like 7 or 8 minutes long, and it's kind of like this vaguely reggae beat, like this loping reggae beat. But it also sort of defies genre, I think, and that's the one I always go to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the greatest thing about digital music is you can just start the album whenever and loop it, as
Yes.
opposed to like putting a record on. I was gonna say the track for me on that one is Bermuda Highway. It's
Oh, so good.
not an everyday track, but you're like, oh, if I need to feel a little bit sad or wistful, maybe I'm gonna put this one on. Oh, so good.
So good. Yes, I love that one too. And then I really like the Christmas curtain
Hmm.
as well. It's just loaded. It's good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Um, okay. Next one, American Window, Marc Chagall, and you even put Art Institute of Chicago on here for that's where it is, I believe.
Hmm.
Um, what's did you see it at the Art Institute of Chicago? Is that what happened?
I did. Yeah, that's where it is. Um, yeah, I first became acquainted with Marc Chagall in college. I was an art major. Um, and I was madly in love with his painting. Um, he painted like livestock, like chickens and goats and like hybrid human animals and this sort of bucolic like landscapes that were meant to represent his hometown in Russia. Very, very dreamlike, like super, super. I think again, well, speaking of defying genre, Chagall's work can be like compared to, depending on the era, it could be surrealistic, it could be cubist, it could be, any number of things, but it definitely is beautiful. He's considered to be one of the great masters of color. Um, and so I loved him so much, and I had a boyfriend for a long time who was from Chicago, and his his dad started to decline while I was living in Ecuador. So this would have been 2010 or 11, and I was probably like 29 or 30. And I flew back to be with him and to be with his family from Ecuador, and um, and to be with his dad and support him as his dad was ailing. And I had never really been around an actively dying person before, um, and had never really been in such close proximity to like that sort of acute grief, when his dad was in hospice. And so at some point on one of those visits, we went to the Art Institute of Chicago. And I didn't know about this. I didn't know about the America Windows installation, but Chagall had in 1977, um, he had installed these stained glass windows. He was primarily a painter, but he was starting to work in stained glass later in his life. And there was something about like walking into this room. I just remember it being incredibly spacious, maybe totally empty, like white, austere room with these huge blue stained glass panes. They're they're massive, and there's just every shade of blue you can imagine. And it was really, really calming, and also very grounding in a way, right? Like those, and the fact that it wasn't a painting, but rather windows. There was just something so impactful there. And so I think it was the juxtaposition of like the weight and intensity of the experience there in Chicago, but then also just the light, the lightness associated with those windows.
So when you see these things, they're like 8 feet tall. Are they are they on a wall? Are they actually? Can you see light coming from outside through them, or how are they
Yeah,
actually installed there?
yeah, windows, totally. Yeah,
Okay.
the windows to the outside.
And
Yeah,
your now ex-boyfriend's father is still alive at this point while you're walking through the art institute, or is this after?
he's still alive.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, but kind of barely, right? And so, really interesting. Yeah, yeah. I think there was the timing of being introduced to those windows was really important.
What do you see any effect of that going forward for you, or was that just kind of like this very emotional moment where you're like, I'm this is just a place this is just going to live in my life as like these two things are going to be attached to each other, like this memory of seeing these windows is always going to be that time, or do you see it kind of going forward for you at all in art or
Hmm,
otherwise?
that's a really good question, Brendan. Um, I think there is something about I think there's something about the medium, and the fact that Chagall, I had known Chagall, I had known his work for so long, but I honestly at that point it hadn't even really sunk in that he was also working in glass. And most of his, I think there were only two of his glass installations that were not in churches. So,
Hmm.
and this was one of them. Um, there was something about the medium that just indicated so much possibility. Um, so, so there was like an expansiveness to the very idea of translating like Chagall's imagery and Chagall's use of color to glass, and then allowing light, obviously, to play an integral part in the art itself. And then there was something too about, and this feels especially poignant right now. I was thinking back. last night about the iconography, the actual content of those windows is like Chagall was this Russian Jew, right? And he lived through World War II in the United States and like loved the United States for the protection that it offered him and the freedom that it offered him. And so those windows are like a celebration of humanities within the context of American liberty. And so there was like, he loved Chicago and he loved the United States so much. And it was like, seeing those for me, like seeing those windows in the middle of this like stark, cold Chicago winter where the like death was kind of like the theme, there was like this deep resonant understanding of like possibility again, like what America represented to Chagall and how like in all that darkness and all that coldness, like, and for him, like all the violence that, his, that he lived through and yet like, this is what America meant to Chagall. And so I don't know if any of that makes sense. That's a little loopy. But it's all wrapped up for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you ever work with stained glass at all?
Never.
You got enough room at your new place, maybe, to do stained glass? I don't know. The comment about only 2 of his stained glass installations not being in churches kind of makes me wonder how much stained glass is not in churches. Like, what percentage of it? Because I feel like that's the main venue,
Totally.
But who knows? Yeah.
Totally.
Okay, number 4. We have another music one. I gotta say, I was honestly surprised you didn't have a Widespread Panic, no mention whatsoever on this list. But this is great because I have more experience with both these artists.
Yeah.
Sturgill Simpson concert at the Wilma Theater in Missoula, November 8th, 2016. You knew the date there, so what? Or maybe you went back and looked this up, but
I didn't have to look that up.
That's specific. Yeah, why didn't you have to look it up?
Yeah, that was so Sturgill Simpson came and played a show in Missoula on election night in 2016, and so he's magnificent. I love him, adore him. I love everything about him. All the art he's made, all the commentary he's released into the world, everything that he does. And he was touring Sailor's Guide to Earth, which was this album that came out in April of 2016 and was like so brilliant and so novel. And he was touring with a horn section. It's like a really big sound. And he played at the Wilma, which is our little theater in Missoula, just up from the river. And, it was election night. You might recall, like, you might remember that date. I don't know. I mean...
I have my own stories for the next day, but yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it was tense, right? It was a super tense night. There was a lot of confused energy in the theater. It felt like the right thing to do, obviously. Like, we wouldn't have missed the show. And, like, I don't know, to be there with all of our friends, like, made sense. And then at some point, in the second set, there was like this shock wave that just kind of like reverberated down from like the balcony down to the floor. And everyone knew what was going on. People are on their phones. People are starting to like drop out. They're starting to like leave. The theater is like emptying out prematurely, and everything shifted, right? Like, the energy shifted. And Sturgill clearly knew what was going on, though he didn't stop playing for a second. And then he just fucking raged. He just like threw down so hard. And, to me, this concert was like it represents the power of musicians to hold space for something as big as what happened on that night.
Yeah. Do you remember when you say he raged? Do you remember what songs
He
at
was,
all?
he was basically playing that Sailor's Guide to Earth start to finish. If I remember correctly, that second set was like the album, which should be taken as a whole because it's so brilliant. Um, and he just wailed. Yeah.
What was the mood? What was the mood like when he was doing that, or like how did the mood shift in the theater,
Yeah.
or did it?
It shifted a lot. Nothing was stable. I remember it being like, it really did feel like waves, like these like strange, energetic waves. Not to sound too woo, but like it was unlike anything I've ever experienced. And I've been to a lot of shows. I've seen a lot of live music, and this one takes the cake as far as like him preserving the integrity of this container for that shifting energy, because people were like, there was anger, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of intensity. Like I said, people were just like bailing out of the theater, and he was like, nope, we're like staying the course, and we're gonna finish this thing strong. No one requested an encore, right? Like he like walked off the stage, that was it. um but man, I've got so much respect for him.
How does that feel looking back at that concert and that day now, like given what's happening in America, in the US right now? Like, how does that feel?
Yeah. Yeah. um Shoot, this is the spot I was telling you about. Emotions.
Mm-hmm.
um it's a bookend, right? Like so many experiences we have with art and music, like that particular concert and that particular night feels like it was a place where something started. you know when that concert ended, something else started. And um and I think that, the important thing, yeah, I think the important thing that I keep coming back to is that music and art, absolutely more important now than ever before, or I mean, as it ever has been during times of unrest or, you know, violence. And yeah, I remember I was teaching high school at the time, and I remember the next day I had to go to parent teacher conferences, which were very poorly attended. And,
Wow.
I actually wrote a letter to Sturgill Simpson from my office, or my classroom, that evening, just being like, now's the time, right? Like, where we see what music can do and how music can support what's about to come next.
That's kind of the whole theme of this Fela Kuti podcast, Fear No Man, that our mutual friend Nick Triolo turned me on to, which is really interesting to look back that far and be listening to that and hear what happened with all of his music. Yeah, I know.
And that's Jab, right?
Yep.
Jab Abumrad.
Chad Abumrad, yep.
Yeah. So good.
I'm 4 episodes in. I'm into it. I love Fela Kuti, though.
Yeah.
Not the person. He's definitely a problematic person, but the music is amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. This last one this is a great pick because it's not something anybody else can actually see, but it's my dad's Micromet weather data collection units, early 1990s to present. I think you have to describe what a Micromet weather data collection unit is
Yeah.
to like because I don't know what that is, and I think it's be
No.
useful for the podcast.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine that anyone really knows what these are. Um, but yeah, my dad, in his work, he invented instruments that were designed to collect weather and ocean and snow data from various landscapes, primarily across Alaska. But then in the later years of his business and of his work, he extended his reach to like he's got he's got these little weather stations in like Chile and Greenland and all over the west coast anyway of our country. But the way the way these little things work is they're like there's a like a box like a weather like a weatherproof box with a little solar powered whirly bird on top like a little
Anemometer,
maybe sounds good.
the wind thing.
Yeah, a little wind thing, a little
Yeah.
wind thing that's always spinning, always whirring, and and then he would, and then and the these telemetry sites would just basically they collect the data and then they'd send it back to servers in his basement, his laboratory, through satellite telemetry and also through meteor burst, which is kind of old technology where you bounce a radio signal off of a meteor and it triangulates back to a receptor site. Um, and so his biggest client was the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, who runs all the snowtell sites in the country. So if you're a skier, or if you use, if you recreate or use rivers, or if you're interested in like water supply and floods and climate trends, the snowtell sites are critical to that. So my dad, he would install these units out on the landscape by himself. And sometimes he would take me and my little brother out with him. And we'd go out on like four-wheelers or boats and try to get to these weather stations. And then he would install these stations. And I never would have called my dad's work creative until more recent years, as I've been kind of working with him not working with him, working independent of him to wrap up and shut down his business as he's got Alzheimer's and his brain has been totally stolen away. He doesn't work anymore. But I do see when I'm up there in Alaska, I every once in a while will stumble if I'm hiking or running, or if I'm out in a river canyon, every once in a while I'll stumble upon one of his weather stations, one of these little units. And so to me now, I've been trying to, and it's not hard, I've been trying to see these inventions and instruments as art, as quasi-permanent installations out on the land.
Yeah, I have a book called Soviet Bus Stops, and it's actually just all... But the bus stops were created by artists, but they are these functional things that it's just photos of, not great photos of bus stops in former Soviet republics.
Oh, cool.
It's one of two books. They're like little coffee table books, but it's another one of those things. It's like it's a very functional piece that's out there, and
Yeah.
that you have, that actually it is art.
Yes.
How big are these things we're talking about when you and your dad and your brother go to take one out and install? It's like the size of a microwave, or is it smaller than that?
Yeah, the little boxes are, they're maybe like 12 by 12, and they house circuit boards or whatever goes in them. Honestly, I'm not actually 100% sure what you'd call the little instruments that go in the box. And then they, he'd install them on a tripod, and the tripod, would then be anchored into the rock or into the whatever the surface is that you're working with, and then there'd be like appendages coming off, different sensors, different instruments, but the tripods themselves, the ones that are in the mountains anyway, are probably like 8 to 10 feet tall.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you get a sense at some point where you realized your dad had like a unique job, or maybe even an interesting job compared to other other parents?
Yeah, definitely. You know, he worked for himself. Like he worked for the USGS. That's what took him to Alaska initially, and then he was working with this meteor burst communications service for a long time too. But then he broke off on his own because he wanted to be independent and he wanted to work alone. And so I think for me, um, I think it was hard sometimes to be the child of an entrepreneur and an inventor, because those two things, those two professions, those two identities, I think were sometimes at odds, because he was a terrible, terrible businessman. And so he never made enough money to be comfortable. So he was always, always hustling, even though he was create and working constantly working. So even though the things that he was creating were so proprietary to his brain and his imagination, and so necessary in the world. But yet he was never compensated in the way that he should have been. And so I think for me as a kid, and honestly as an adult up until very recently, I sort of resented his work. And until not until I started diving a little deeper into its value and into its evolution, and then also starting to see the units out on the landscape with new eyes, that's when I realized, oh, like dad's work was singular in that way. But no, as a kid, I definitely, I mean, I liked going out on the four-wheeler with him, and I liked going out on the boats. And he went to some incredible places, you know, incredible austere landscapes and oceanscapes that were, that I will probably never see, you know. And that part seemed very cool to me. But yeah, I resented his work often because it took him so far away from home.
Yeah, dentists. That would have been a stable. But I was gonna say, like, undercompensated, doing important work. He definitely was an artist then,
Yeah.
or had something in common with artists. Uh, and you work for yourself now too. Um, Strangely, do you think that's? Do you think there was something from your dad in that decision to try to work independently, or is that just a fluke?
No, I don't think that's a fluke. Um, there's definitely there's like a personality type, isn't there? Right? Like maybe I don't know, or maybe there's yeah, maybe there's just this. Maybe full circle. It comes back to that, like my side of the mountain, island of the blue dolphins, like just kind of wanting to operate outside of the establishment.
Well, full circle.
Full circle. Tie it up with a bow. Put a stamp on it. We're done.
Wow,
We're done here.
it's amazing. Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I know that when people start working for themselves, it's very hard to, in my experience, it's very hard to talk yourself into going back, even though I think about it pretty much weekly.
Oh,
Um,
100%. Yeah, I think about it
right.
all the time.
So
I would love to have a
yeah,
boss that's like, that's not good enough. That's good enough. Okay, your day is done. Right?
you get paid. You get paid on Fridays, same
Yeah.
amount. Yeah, you get
Yeah.
paid this month.
Yeah.
Take, take some money home. Yeah. Oh, there's one more question I was going to ask. Uh, do you think he had similar feelings that you might have that you have now in running your own business and in a creative man, and this thing you created that's not, it's not a job. It's a job you're making up, and it's a business you've created that's unique. Do you think you've had similar? Do you think your dad had any similar emotions or moments as you've had the last almost 10 years now with Free Flow Institute in his work?
Yeah. It's a really good question. Yeah. I think so. I think he definitely I remember moments in our, in my growing up, in my childhood, where he was just like, I'm done. I'm flushing this down the toilet. I'm walking away. I can't, like full blown meltdowns, right? From the stress and also the lack, like, right, we were talking about the lack of compensation, the lack of structure, the lack of identifiable benchmarks that make you feel like a crazy person, and he just, yeah, but then, his identity was so inextricably tied up in his work that ultimately there would have been no other recourse. To your point, he could not have gone back to work for someone else because he had made this place for himself in the world, which was the work.
So, yeah, I guess, yeah. I mentioned like getting a real job to I don't know which friend a few months ago, and they're like, "Really? What could you actually do?" It's like, hey, come on, man. The flip side of that question, though, is do you ever, it's this classic like parenting moment where you're like saying something to your kid, and you're like, "Oh my god, I sound just like my mom, or I sound just like my dad." Have you had a like a business related meltdown where you're like, I'm turning into my dad, like
It's horrible. It's horrifying, isn't it? It's like, and then, but then, when you're younger, it's terrifying. But then there's like a point where it kind of flips, and you're like, "Oh, that's not so bad. Like, I wouldn't mind being, like this is actually a right. Like, you're like, well, this is something I. There's like a latent, like subterranean respect that I didn't even know was there, and it kind of bubbles up, and I have this like, in those moments of suffering, you're like, animosity toward the project. I'm just like, well, no, Dad must have felt this too. And so there's like a connection. It's like a strange, miserable connection there as well.
yes, we are. This is like time travel. We are united through this special moment that we're both having. Yeah, no, I think the layperson's term or way of saying it I've heard is the older I get, the smarter my dad gets.
Yes.
Which is sort of, you can say that for moms too, of course.
Yes.
Or any parent, but yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, well, I hope your business keeps going, if you want it to. It seems it's been fun for me. Uh,
Thanks, Brendan. I hope it keeps going too.
yeah. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to discuss your favorite art. This has been super fun. I think we tied it up very nicely at the end there.
Great. Yeah, that's the goal, right? Nothing messy or nothing ambiguous or open-ended.
Nope, we're good. That's the
Yeah.
end. Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Chandra.
Brendan.